She walked away from everything. Her career, her reputation, her passion. No one came after her. Until he did. And what he brought was the last thing she was ready for. Vivian Blake was done. Not with life. She still woke up early, still brewed her coffee with intention, still read the paper front to back like the world made sense. But she was done with the fight, with scraping by on grace and sentiment, with trying to convince people that art mattered in a city that only seemed to care about square footage and steel beams. She stood in the center of her gallery, Blake and Mercer, as the plaque out front still read, surrounded by a stillness that used to feel like sanctuary. The sunlight filtering through the tall warehouse windows spilled across the floor in warm ribbons, catching on the varnish of old frames and the edges of canvas corners. Dust motes floated in the golden beams like memories she hadn't agreed to revisit. It was the last Monday before the deal closed, before the paperwork finalized, before the gallery, her gallery, would officially belong to someone else. To him. Vivian pulled her coat tighter, a long gray wool wrap, clean cut, nearly brushing the tops of her black leather boots. She dressed with care this morning, not to impress, but to armor. She wore a soft black turtleneck beneath it, no jewelry, no lipstick. Her shoulder-length dark blonde hair was tucked behind one ear, revealing the faint silver strands she no longer bothered to dye. She was 52, not fragile, not desperate, but aware, painfully, of what it meant to watch something you built get erased. He was supposed to be here by 9 o'clock. At 9:27, the door opened with a soft chime. Vivian didn't turn right away. She listened to the footsteps. Slow, even, confident in that annoying, bone-deep kind of way that only people with too much money and too few real problems ever moved. He didn't speak immediately, didn't announce himself. She turned, slowly, tall, maybe 6'2", late 30s, early 40s. Dark navy overcoat, sharp-pressed trousers, polished shoes that barely made sound. His face was carved in quiet decisions. Not cold, but unreadable. Clean-shaven jaw, slate gray eyes. A presence that was less about ego and more about inevitability. So this was Bennett Hale, the man who'd just bought her building. The man who was planning to tear it down. The man who'd sent a legal team to do all the talking until now. "You're Vivian Blake," he said. It wasn't a question. "And you're late," she replied. His mouth tugged slightly at the corner. Not a smirk. Not quite. More like a private note to himself. "I walked," he said. "Fifth to Mercer. Wanted to feel the space before I stepped inside it." She didn't respond. Didn't ask what feeling the space meant to a man who'd already made up his mind to destroy it. He stepped further into the room, his eyes scanning the exposed brick, the reclaimed wood beams, the track lighting that bathed the space in a soft glow. It still smelled like linseed oil and old books, even though she hadn't hung a new show in 3 weeks. "It's a beautiful space," he said. Not casually, not flippantly. Vivian replied. His eyes met hers. "You did all this yourself?" "Restored it, piece by piece. It used to be a coat factory in the 20s. I found blueprints rolled up under the floorboards." His gaze lingered on a corner of the room where the floor dipped slightly. He said nothing, just took it in. "And now," she added, "you're here to make it into another boutique hotel, or condo tower, or whatever real estate fever dream you've drawn up in an office with a skyline view." He finally looked at her, directly. "I haven't finalized the plans." Vivian blinked. "You already bought it." "I bought the building," he said. "I didn't say I decided what to do with it." That stopped her. Not enough to hope, but enough to listen. She studied him, trying to find the angle, the tactic, the reason he'd come here himself when he could have just signed the final paperwork and moved on. "What do you want, Mr. Hale?" "Bennett," he said, "and I want a conversation." Vivian crossed her arms, bracing herself against the sudden tightness in her chest. "You want a conversation," she repeated. "I wanted to see what you built," he said, "and understand why everyone who steps into this space keeps telling me not to touch it." For the first time, Vivian's voice softened, just a fraction. "Because it's more than walls. It's memory. It's community. People came here when they had nowhere else to go." He nodded. "I get it." "No," she said. "You don't. But maybe you could." Another beat of silence. And in it, Something unspoken passed between them. Respect. Maybe. Maybe something else. Bennett glanced up at the light again, and Vivian, without meaning to, wondered if something about this wasn't over after all. Not yet. Not quite. The rain had started by the time they walked the block. Vivian hadn't meant to go with him. It just happened. One moment, she was showing Bennett Hale the photograph mounted behind her desk, a black and white shot of the gallery on opening day, sunlit and full of life. The next, she was standing next to him under a narrow black awning while the city misted quietly around them. He didn't hold an umbrella. Of course he didn't. Men like him moved through weather like it wasn't there. She clutched the collar of her coat a little tighter. Her hands were cold, but she wasn't going to admit it. He, on the other hand, had already rolled up his sleeves. Casual, relaxed, like none of this. The building, the pending demolition, her future, was heavy. "You came here alone?" she asked. He looked over. "I live in Manhattan. I know how to walk." "That's not what I meant." He gave a faint smile, but didn't answer. They reached the edge of the block where the gallery's brick facade turned into polished stone and chain store signage. Vivian paused. Bennett did too. "I'm still not clear on why you're here," she said finally. "I told you, to see the space. You already bought it. Sight unseen. I've seen photos." Vivian's brow lifted, and that was enough to write a check. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he tilted his head and looked at her like he was trying to decide how honest to be. "I bought it," he said, "because it was about to get swept up by a hedge fund that would have stripped it to bones in a week. Sometimes you stop a worse deal by making your own." She blinked. "So this is charity?" "No, this is leverage." Vivian crossed her arms, chin tipped slightly. "Yours or mine? Does it matter?" She turned to go, but he stopped her with a quiet question. "Do you really want to walk away?" She froze. The answer was supposed to be yes. That's what she'd been telling herself for months. That was time, that she was tired, that running a gallery in 2025 was a sinking ship no matter how hard she bailed. But something about the way he asked, not as a businessman, not as a buyer, unraveled her practiced answer. She didn't say anything. "You built something rare," Bennett said. "People don't shut up about it. That kind of gravity doesn't happen by accident." She faced him slowly. "And what does a billionaire with steel and glass portfolios care about gravity?" He met her gaze, steady and still. "You'd be surprised." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The city kept pulsing around them. Horns, footsteps, the occasional rattle of subway grates steaming upward. Vivian exhaled. "Are you going to tear it down?" she asked. His voice was quiet. "Not yet." She didn't like how that answer settled in her. Back inside the gallery, she poured them both small paper cups of lukewarm coffee from the back room, handing him one without ceremony. He took it with a nod, fingers brushing hers for the briefest second. Vivian didn't pull away. "You know," he said, looking around, "I thought it would feel older." "It is old." "Yeah, but it doesn't feel tired." She smiled faintly, folding her hands. "I like old things. They have better stories." He sipped his coffee. "And what's yours?" "Too long for today." "I've got time." She glanced at the clock. "You said you had a call at 10. Elite." She rolled her eyes, but didn't stop smiling. They stood like that for a while. Two people who shouldn't have had anything in common, separated by years and tax brackets and the potential collapse of everything she'd ever built. And yet, Vivian walked him to the door, hand on the old brass handle. He turned just before stepping out. The rain had stopped. "Will you be here tomorrow?" he asked. "Depends." "On what?" "Whether I'm still the one with the key." Bennett looked at her, really looked, and said something she wouldn't expect until much later to mean everything. "Keys can change hands. Doesn't mean the door has to close." Then he was gone, and Vivian, who had spent the last 6 weeks preparing to let go, stood alone in the quiet glow of a gallery that suddenly didn't feel like the end. It felt like a beginning. Vivian didn't expect him to return the next day, or the day after, but he did, not with the arrogance of a man used to getting his way, but with the steadiness of someone who didn't plan to leave until he understood what he'd walked into. The third morning, he stood in front of the gallery's windows again, hands in the pockets of a wool coat that didn't need to prove its price. He didn't knock this time, just waited, like he knew she'd see him. like he was giving her the choice. She opened the door without a word. "You're persistent," she said, not smiling. "I'm thorough," he replied, and stepped inside. Vivian watched him walk the same path he had days ago. But this time, there was no polite distance, no curious glancing. He moved slowly, eyes sharp, like he was trying to read between the brushstrokes. "You're not here to appraise the artwork," she said. He looked at her. "I'm here to understand what I've inherited." "Inherited?" she repeated. He gave a slow smile, dry, careful. Figuratively speaking, Vivian crossed her arms. "You don't inherit what you buy. You erase it. Only if you think they're the same thing." There was a quiet beat between them. The sound of a heater ticking somewhere in the back. The faint hum of a city waking up just beyond the glass. Then he asked, "Why haven't you left?" It wasn't accusatory. It wasn't even curious in the usual way. It was deeper, as if he was asking something else entirely. Vivian hesitated, unsure whether the truth would land or rebound. "I thought I had," she admitted. He tilted his head slightly. "And yet, I keep unlocking the door every morning, even after knowing I own the building." Especially then. That got a real smile from him. A flicker of something beneath the surface. Respect, maybe, or recognition. He walked toward the central display, paused in front of a black and white photograph of an elderly woman holding a bouquet of broken paintbrushes like flowers. "She looks like someone who survived too many stories," he said. "She did," Vivian replied. "That's my grandmother." Bennett looked at the photograph again, then back at Vivian. "Did she build this place?" Vivian shook her head. "She built me. This place came later." He didn't speak right away, but when he did, his voice had softened. "I thought this was going to be another empty parcel," he said. "Another beautiful wreck waiting to be reinvented." Vivian's mouth tightened. "And now, I'm not sure what I walked into, but it doesn't feel like a wreck." She let out a quiet breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Why are you really here, Mr. Hale?" He met her gaze, calm, steady. "Because sometimes you walk into a room and realize it isn't just a space. It's someone's memory, someone's fight." Vivian stared at him, unsure what startled her more, the words or the way he said them. "You could have sent someone else," she said. "You could have made this clinical. Fast. I've made enough decisions from the top floor of a glass office," he said. "This one needed boots on the ground." She frowned. "Why this one?" He looked around. "Because I don't believe in ghosts. But I believe in the weight of something that refuses to disappear." Vivian swallowed. For a moment, the room didn't feel so cold. The light through the windows didn't feel so harsh. He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "I'm not here to play savior," he said. "But I'm not walking away either." Then, without waiting for a reply, he stepped outside, into wind and sky and the city's pulse, and was gone. Vivian stood in the silence he left behind. And for the first time in months, she didn't feel like she was the only one left trying to hold it all together. Vivian didn't see Bennett for 3 days. She told herself it was better that way. Let things cool. Let the reality of ownership settle in. Let him forget whatever momentary sense of obligation had tied him to the gallery's crumbling walls. But on the 4th day, a delivery arrived. A flat package, carefully wrapped, no return address. Inside, a single painting. Not one of hers. Not one from the gallery. It was hers. A self-portrait she'd painted 7 years ago and sold in a charity auction in D.C. A wild, impulsive piece in cobalt blue and fractured lines. One she'd painted after a funeral. One she hadn't seen since. And yet, here it was. There was no note. Just a slip of heavy paper tucked into the corner with her name, handwritten in black ink. V. No flourish. No explanation. No signature. She stared at it for a full minute before sliding the canvas back into the packaging and placing it in the office. Out of sight, but not, as it turned out, out of mind. That afternoon, she walked the gallery again, hands behind her back, gaze drifting across familiar pieces. Her work, others. All of it felt different now. Not safer, not better, just seen. The bell above the door rang at 4:17 p.m. She didn't look up right away. She knew it was him, knew by the rhythm of the steps, by the way the room responded, how the air changed. When she did look, he was already halfway in, scarf tucked neatly into his coat, wind at his back, and eyes sharper than she remembered. "You bought my painting," she said. "No," he replied. "I returned it." Vivian didn't blink. "That's a bold move." He shrugged. "You left a piece of yourself behind. I figured it belonged in the place you haven't walked away from yet." She hated that he was good at that, at aiming just below the surface. "Why do you care?" she asked. "I don't know yet," he said simply, "but I'm not afraid to find out." She studied him. The kind of man who could make a building disappear with one call. The kind who didn't flinch at loss, only at wasted potential. And yet, he hadn't touched the gallery. Not a single change. Not even a lock replaced. "You're not what I expected," she murmured. "Good," he said. "Expectations are lazy." There was silence again, but not the hollow kind. Then Bennett walked slowly to the center of the room and turned in a slow circle, like he was taking in the space with new eyes. "This place could be extraordinary," he said. "It already is," she replied a little too quickly. He turned to her, not to challenge, just to clarify. "It could be seen." Vivian folded her arms. "You think I haven't tried?" "I think you've been trying alone." The words landed like a soft impact. Not a blow, a recognition. "I don't do partnerships," she said. He nodded. "I didn't offer one." "Not yet." She almost laughed. "You always this careful?" "No," he said. "But you make recklessness feel expensive." That stunned her, just enough for a smile to flicker. Bennett took a step closer. "I'm not your enemy, Vivian, and I'm not your charity case." "Good," he said. "Now that we understand each other." He turned again toward the door, but this time, he hesitated. "You're hosting that local showcase next Friday, aren't you?" She blinked. "I was. Still should. I'll make sure people show up." She frowned. "What kind of people?" "The ones who decide what lasts." Vivian narrowed her eyes. "You're not exactly subtle." "No," he said with a smile. "But I'm often right." Then he left, and this time he took the coal with him. Vivian stood in the warmth that remained and realized, whatever he was doing, it wasn't casual. It was personal. The local showcase had never been glamorous. It was wine in plastic cups and mismatched name tags. Folding tables covered with velvet cloths someone ironed in a hurry. Artists hunched beside their pieces, equal parts pride and fear in their eyes. It was small. It was intimate. It mattered. Vivian hadn't wanted to cancel it. Not really. But after the sale, after everything, she'd assumed the event wouldn't survive the transition. New ownership rarely liked holding space for the old guard. But then, the emails began. An RSVP list that included names she'd only heard in passing, buyers from Manhattan, gallery reps from Chicago, even a whisper of someone from Art Scene Monthly, which never bothered with anything north of Soho unless there were headlines or scandals. Bennett hadn't said another word, but she knew. Every name, every call, it was him. Vivian should have been furious, should have resented the intrusion. But as she stood in the back hallway watching the gallery fill with laughter and hum, all she felt was breathless. The last time this many people had stood inside these walls, her mother had still been alive. Vivian adjusted the collar of her blouse, pressed a hand to her stomach to quiet the nerves. She didn't recognize half the faces. They didn't know the cracks in the ceiling or the story behind the scuffed baseboard near the back door. They didn't know this place the way she did, but they were here. And that meant something. At precisely 7:12 p.m., Bennett Hale arrived. Not with security. Not with a date. Alone. He wore a slate suit and no tie. Coat unbuttoned. Watch glinting at the edge of his sleeve. He looked like the version of himself that lived in the Wall Street Journal. Not the one who delivered paintings without signatures. Their eyes met across the room, and for a moment, no one else existed. Vivian didn't move. She didn't wave, but she didn't look away either. He didn't come straight to her. He made the rounds, quiet nods, brief conversations, a glance at a sculpture by a teenage girl whose parents stood nearby beaming. He was present, intentional, and when he finally made his way to her, he waited until the crowd gave space. "You throw a beautiful party," he said. "This isn't a party. It is now." Vivian arched an eyebrow. "You didn't have to do this." "Of course I did. You could have let it die. That's not my style." She studied him. "Why does it matter to you? This gallery? Me? Any of it?" He tilted his head. Because you're the first person I've met in years who still believes in something that isn't about scale or exit strategy. You build slow. You care long. You say that like it's rare. It is. Vivian folded her arms. And what do you believe in, Mr. Hale? He didn't blink. Redemption, he said. The word cracked something in her. Something she hadn't realized was still brittle. She looked away, back toward the gallery floor. Why are you really here tonight? She asked. I wanted to see what it looked like when the world showed up. And he smiled, not smug, not rehearsed. Just honest. It suits you. Vivian swallowed. There was again that quiet insistence that she mattered more than she let on. Thank you, she said finally, for not making it about you. Bennett leaned in slightly, his voice low. Everything worth saving takes more than one set of hands. She wasn't ready for how much that landed. Before she could respond, someone called her name, a guest with a question about a painting near the back. She turned instinctively, nodded, then glanced back at Bennett. He was already walking away. Not gone, just giving her space. And somehow, that meant more than if he'd stayed. The gallery was quiet the next morning. Not empty, just resting. Sunlight filtered in through the east windows, casting soft angles across the hardwood. Vivian moved slowly, coffee in hand, taking in the remnants of the night before. A forgotten brochure on the floor. A stray wine cork near the pedestal. Someone had left a scarf draped over the back of a chair. Silk. Expensive. She'd have to check the lost and found bin. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, all she felt was suspended. Not falling. Not rising. Just hovering at the edge of something too new to name. The event had been a success. More than she'd expected. Artwork sold. Business cards exchanged. An invitation to co-host a spring collective in Manhattan. It was the kind of validation she used to dream about. And yet, beneath the quiet pride, there was something else. A weight. She didn't realize how long she'd been standing there until she heard the door open. Footsteps. Slow, unhurried. She didn't have to look. I thought billionaires slept in, she said. Bennett chuckled. I don't sleep much. Too many moving parts. Vivian turned. He wore jeans and a dark sweater this time. Less Wall Street. More man. He looked like someone who had lived a few lives and wasn't afraid to admit it. You're early, she added. You're here. She motioned to the space. It's mine. For now. He stepped closer, gaze sweeping the room. Last night was remarkable. Vivian shrugged. It was good. It was more than that. You created something. You pulled people in, not with pressure or polish. With presence. She stared at him. Are you always this poetic at 8 a.m.? He smiled. Only when the coffee's strong. Vivian hesitated, then held out her cup. Try it. He took a sip. Nodded once. Not bad. High praise. They stood in silence for a beat. The kind that hummed with unspoken things. Why did you really come back? She asked suddenly. To the gallery? To this town? This life? Me? Bennett didn't flinch. Because some things don't feel finished. Vivian looked away. You make it sound so simple. It's not. But it doesn't mean it's wrong. She let the words hang in the air. He was right. And that terrified her more than if he'd been lying. I'm not someone you rescue, Bennett, she said softly. I don't need saving. I never said you did. Then what is this? He stepped closer. It's me showing up. Because I want to. Not because you need me. Vivian felt her throat tighten. No one had said that to her in years. Not without strings. She looked down at her shoes. Black flats, scuffed at the heel. She hadn't planned to see anyone today. Hadn't armored up. When she looked back up, he was watching her. Not in the way men look when they want something. In the way people do when they're trying not to break whatever they've found. I saw your mother once, Bennett said. Vivian blinked. What? She was at a show in the city. Years ago. I didn't speak to her. But she stood in front of this massive canvas for 10 minutes like it was whispering to her. Vivian's chest ached. She had a presence, he added. She did, Vivian said quietly. You remind me of her. That's dangerous. Maybe, but true. Vivian set her coffee down on the nearest pedestal. I don't know what you're trying to do. I'm not trying, he said. I'm choosing. The words hit harder than she expected, and she didn't have a response for them. Not yet. Bennett nodded toward the back. Want to walk the garden? Vivian hesitated. There's frost on the ground. All the more reason. She didn't say yes, but she followed him anyway. And for the first time in a very long time, she didn't feel like she was walking toward the end of something. She felt like she might be walking toward the beginning. The silence in the gallery felt louder than anything Vivian had endured in years. Bennett stood by the tall window, back to her, framed by the faint light of dusk that filtered through the gray. The city buzzed in the distance, sirens, horns, life. But in here, it was only the two of them in a space suddenly too small for everything unsaid. Vivian had always been good with silences. She'd lived in them, painted through them, let them shield her. But this one pressed against her chest like a weight, demanding something she wasn't sure she could give. "You didn't have to come back," she said, her voice quieter than she meant. Bennett didn't turn. His hands were in his coat pockets, stiff with restraint. "I know. Then why?" Now he turned, slowly, and when their eyes met, something in her tightened. His expression wasn't angry. It wasn't proud. It was something far worse. It was honest. "Because I couldn't walk away," he said. "Not again." Vivian crossed her arms, trying to protect something inside her she wasn't sure still existed. "You say that like it means something." "It does." She laughed, but there was no joy in it. "You think showing up now erases everything? The deal? The paperwork? The fact that you were ready to level the place I've spent my life building?" "I wasn't ready," he said. "I was running." "From what?" He hesitated. "My father. His legacy. The idea that power means breaking things to prove you can." Vivian turned toward the wall, not because she didn't want to hear him, but because she did. He kept going, slower now. "I bought the building because I thought the only way to build something new was to burn down what came before. I thought it was bold. I thought it was necessary. And now I see I wasn't tearing down a building." He paused. "I was trying to tear down a part of myself." She blinked hard. Once, then again. Bennett stepped closer, carefully. His presence was warm and still. Not invasive, but near enough to make her breath catch. "I didn't know what this gallery meant to you. Not until I saw you in it. Not until I watched you fight for it. Not with noise or drama, but with grace. With stubborn, relentless grace." Vivian didn't speak. She couldn't, because it was the first time anyone had said something like that to her. Not about her art. Not about the gallery. About her. "I never meant to hurt you," he said. "But I did." She turned to him. Her arms dropped to her sides, and her voice trembled in a way that shocked even her. "You did," she said, "but that's not what scares me." He swallowed. "What does? That part of me still wants to believe you." His eyes softened. "Then believe me." Vivian stepped back. "It's not that easy." "I know." He looked down, then back up. "That's why I'm not asking for anything. Not now. Not a second chance. Not forgiveness. Just the truth." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Whose?" "Yours." Silence again. And this time it didn't hurt. She looked around at the space. The worn-wood floors, the faded brick, the canvases that had absorbed her hope and heartbreak in equal measure. Then she looked at him. Bennett Hale, a man with every reason to leave. Still here, still asking. And in her chest, something softened. Not trust, not yet, but the possibility of it. "I don't know if I can give you that," she said. He nodded once. "Then I'll wait." And in the quiet that followed, something shifted. Not the air, not the light. Her. Vivian didn't sleep that night. She didn't paint, either, or eat, or cry. She just moved from room to room in her apartment, above the gallery, like a woman chasing ghosts. The conversation with Bennett played in loops. The things he said, the things she hadn't. At 3 a.m., she stood barefoot in her studio, hands dusted with charcoal from the sketch she wasn't really working on. A single bulb cast light across the canvas, half-finished and aching with silence. She hated how part of her wanted to believe him. Not just believe him, reach for him, like there was still something to reach for. By morning, she was back in the gallery, lights on before the sun came up. She swept, rearranged the chairs, adjusted the track lights again and again. Busy hands to quiet the chaos inside her. And then a knock. Not on the front door, the side one. The private entrance only people who really knew the place remembered existed. She opened it without thinking. It was Bennett. He didn't step in. He just held up 2 coffees. I brought peace offerings, he said softly. And caffeine. Vivian hesitated, then stepped aside. They didn't talk right away. He handed her the cup. Black. Just how she liked it. She didn't ask how he remembered. I have a question, he said finally. Dangerous start, she replied, sipping. It's not about the building, he said, or your work. It's about you. She froze. I've spent so much time making decisions for people who never asked me to, Bennett said, pacing slowly. And somehow, I never once asked what you wanted. Not in that boardroom. Not the day we met. Not when I handed you those papers. Vivian stared at him. And now, she asked. I want to ask, he said simply. Vivian, what do you want? The words hung in the air like paint that hadn't yet dried. No one had asked her that in years. Not her ex-husband, who measured love in logistics. Not her family, who assumed the gallery was just a phase. Not the donors who walked through her doors, expecting pretty things on the walls and easy smiles at the wine bar. She opened her mouth and found she didn't have an answer. I want to matter, she said, surprising herself. Not to a spreadsheet or a buyer. To someone. To something real. You already do, he said without hesitation. That's not enough, she whispered. It has to come from me. He nodded slowly. Then what if I help make space for that? Not own it. Not define it. Just protect it. Vivian blinked. Because that didn't sound like a pitch. Or plan. It sounded like respect. A kind of reverence that made her breath catch. Why now? She asked, voice thin. Bennett's eyes met hers. Steady. Clear. Because for the first time in my life, I realized I don't want to build anything that doesn't have you in it. Silence. But this time it didn't ache. It breathed. Vivian stepped back, needing distance she didn't understand. Her spine hit the edge of the display table, where a single canvas rested, one of hers. Abstract. Chaotic. A piece she never put up for sale. Bennett followed her gaze. You made this, he said. She nodded. It's how I felt the day you handed me the offer letter. He exhaled. I deserve that. No, she said. You didn't. Not all of it. But you do deserve the truth. He looked at her. Open. Waiting. I don't know what happens next, she said. But I'm tired of choosing between my future and my self-respect. Then don't, he said. Let's build something different. Together. Her throat tightened, because somewhere deep down, she realized this was the first time a man hadn't asked her to shrink. Not for his comfort. Not for his world. And maybe, just maybe it was a start. The reopening of the gallery was never supposed to be a spectacle. Vivian had planned it modestly. Just a small show, local artists, soft jazz playing through the old speaker system she refused to upgrade. No press. No donors. No pretenses. But the night arrived, and the sidewalk outside buzzed with quiet anticipation. Not loud, not flashy, but full. The kind of energy that told you something mattered here, even if you didn't quite know why. Inside, the space glowed. The floors gleamed with fresh polish. The walls held stories. Hers, others, everyone's, painted in every stroke. And near the entrance, beside the welcome table, stood a single placard. Carrington Gallery. In memory of beginnings and the courage to stay. Vivian hadn't written it. Bennett had, without asking. But when she read it, her throat had closed in that way that meant something real had hit its mark. He hadn't spoken big words since that morning in the studio. No grand declarations. No sweeping gestures. Instead, he showed up. Every day. Some mornings with coffee. Some afternoons with just a passing hello. Some evenings with quiet hands helping her hang canvases long after the lights went out. He hadn't asked again for answers. He hadn't tried to fix anything. He just made space and stayed in it. And Vivian, slowly, quietly, let him. Now, she stood in the far corner of the gallery, watching guests wander between paintings. Some were collectors. Some were neighbors. A few were faces she hadn't seen in years. Old students, former partners. One or two people who had once written her off and now pretended they hadn't. She didn't mind, because in the center of the room stood Bennett Hale. Not making speeches, not shaking hands. Just there, his ties slightly loosened, his sleeves rolled. The man who had once been a threat to everything she'd built, now anchoring it in a way she hadn't expected. When their eyes met across the room, she didn't look away. He didn't either. Later, after the final guest trickled out and the last glass was collected, she locked the doors and leaned against them for a moment. The quiet was familiar now, but no longer felt like solitude. It felt like peace. Behind her footsteps, she turned. Bennett stood there, hands in his pockets, the faintest smile on his lips. "You didn't run," he said. "No," she replied. "I stayed." A pause. "You're allowed to be proud of that," he added. She tilted her head. "I am." He stepped closer, but not too close. Always just enough space for her to move if she needed to. But she didn't. "I thought tonight would be hard," she admitted. "Letting people in again." He nodded. "It was." She smiled. "But it was also worth it." Another pause. "You know," he said gently, "you could start calling this ours." Vivian blinked. Not because she didn't want to. Because she did. Maybe not the gallery. Maybe not yet. But the space between them. This. She stepped forward, just enough that their shadows overlapped on the floor. "I'm not ready for promises," she said. "Not tonight." "Then no promises," he said. "Just right now." And that, finally, was enough. Vivian reached for his hand. Not as surrender. As a beginning. The kind you choose with your eyes open. The kind you build, not because you're afraid to lose, but because you're finally brave enough to try.